The rain was hitting the roof like it was trying to warn me. Hard, angry drops that echoed through the empty house, falling faster and faster, as if time itself had started to slip through my hands. I had already turned off the lights, ready to surrender to another sleepless night, when I heard it. 3 knocks. So soft, I almost mistook them for wind. But I knew better. My chest tightened. Something inside me whispered that this night would not end like the others. I froze in the hallway, my bare feet cold against the old wooden floor. My hand trembled as it reached for the door handle. No one ever knocked on my door anymore, not since they were taken from me. I opened the door slowly, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe no one at all. But there he was, my grandson. He stood there under the porch light, soaked to the bone, his thin sweatshirt clinging to his shaking body, his hair plastered to his forehead, his lips purple from the cold. His big brown eyes, the same eyes I watched fall asleep so many nights, were now red and swollen from crying. He was hugging himself like he was trying to keep his own bones from shattering. And then he whispered it. "Grandma, please don't tell anyone I came. If she finds out, she is going to hit me again. Real bad." My stomach turned. I wanted to pull him into my arms, wrap him in a blanket, give him soup, and make it all go away like I used to when he had nightmares. But this time, the monster was real, and it lived in his own home. He stepped inside like a ghost, barely making a sound. I closed the door behind him slowly, almost afraid that the noise would alert someone watching. I couldn't stop staring at him. How had he gotten here alone? In the rain? In the dark? And why now? After all these months of silence, why did he come tonight? He didn't let go of my hand. He held it like it was the last piece of safety he had left, and I felt it, like a current running through us. Fear, but also trust. A quiet, desperate trust that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I led him to the kitchen, still holding his hand. The house was cold, but I didn't dare leave him alone, not even for a second. I grabbed a towel from the chair, one I had folded days ago without knowing why. Maybe deep down I was waiting for this, hoping, dreaming, praying that one of them would find their way back to me. He sat on the wooden stool, his legs swinging, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. I knelt in front of him and dried his face gently, my hands shaking. There was a bruise on his cheek, a small one, but fresh, purple and cruel against his pale skin. He flinched when I touched it. I asked if he was hungry, and he nodded. But when I set a bowl of soup in front of him, he just stared at it. His hands stayed in his lap, fingers clenched. I watched him closely, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked the question I feared the answer to. "What happened to you, baby?" He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the steam rising from the soup like he was lost inside it. Then, in a voice so soft I had to lean in to hear it, he said, "She told me I can never see you again, that you are dangerous, that you don't love us, but I know that is not true. You always made me feel safe. You always listened." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. Not now. He needed me to be strong. He needed to see the woman who once stood between him and the dark, who made monsters disappear with lullabies and warm cookies. He said he ran away because he couldn't take it anymore, that she hit him when he asked about me, that she threatened to lock him in the basement if he mentioned my name again. And my son, my only son, stood there and let it happen. I should have known. There were signs, messages left unread, calls unanswered, birthdays forgotten. She had erased me from their lives, and no one stopped her. I had become a ghost, and now this child, my child's child, had risked everything just to find me again. He told me he followed the route we used to take to the park, even though it was dark. He remembered the turn by the big oak tree and the alley where the cats used to sleep. He remembered, after all these months, he remembered the way back to me. As I wrapped him in dry clothes and sat him on the couch, I felt a mix of rage and helplessness I had never known before. How could someone hurt something so pure, so small? How could the world keep spinning while he was suffering in silence? He fell asleep with his head in my lap, his little fingers still curled around my shirt like he was afraid I'd disappear in the night. I didn't move. I didn't dare. I watched the rain fall outside, watched the clock tick into the early hours, and I realized this was not just a visit, this was a cry for help. And now that he was here, soaked and broken, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't be afraid of her threats or my son's silence. Because when that boy knocked on my door tonight, he wasn't just asking to come in, he was asking to be saved. If you've ever felt the pain of being separated from someone you love, or if this story reminded you of someone in your life, leave a comment below. Your words might help someone else feel less alone. And if these stories touch your heart, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. My name is Maria Elenice dos Santos. I am 68 years old, and I live in a small white house on the edge of Savannah, Georgia. It is the kind of house with creaky floors that remember every footstep and wallpaper that peels at the corners like it is quietly letting go. There is a rocking chair on the porch that no longer rocks, and a mailbox that rarely holds anything but silence. I have lived here for over 30 years, raised my son here, watched the seasons change and the neighborhood fade. Time moved on, but I stayed. And for a long time, that was enough. I used to work as a seamstress. I spent decades with a needle in my hand and fabric draped over my lap. There was something calming about the repetition, the rhythm of stitching life back into things people thought were ruined. Brides would come to me crying over torn dresses, and I would send them home smiling. I liked that, being useful, being the one people came to when something precious needed saving. When my husband died 12 years ago, everything slowed down. We were married for 41 years. He used to say I was the thread that kept our little family from unraveling. Losing him was like losing the color in a photograph. Everything went dimmer. But I had my son, and later, I had my grandkids. They became the light I needed. The sound of little feet on the floorboards, the smell of cereal in the morning, sticky hands reaching for my face. They filled the cracks he left behind. My days became structured around them. School drop-offs, weekend picnics, bedtime stories. I would make grilled cheese sandwiches with the crusts cut off just the way they liked. I knew which toy belonged to whom and how to soothe each of their nightmares. I was not just their grandmother, I was their safe place. My refrigerator was covered in their drawings, and my closet had board games stacked to the ceiling. I was never rich in money, but I was rich in moments, in laughter, in hugs that lingered, in whispered secrets like, "Grandma, I saw a dragon in the sky today," or "Grandma, can I live here forever?" Then she came. At first she smiled, always polite, too polite. Her name was Charlene, but everyone called her Charlie. My son met her at work and fell fast. He said she was different, strong, a good mother already to her daughter from a previous relationship. I tried to be open. I welcomed her with open arms, cooked her favorite meals, invited her to Sunday dinners. But there was always something cold beneath her warmth, like her smile had edges. Slowly, things changed. At first, I didn't notice it. Life happens in whispers before it screams. The kids started missing visits. My calls went unanswered more often. My son would tell me they were busy or that the kids had homework. Then came the excuses. The kids were sick. The car broke down. Charlie had a headache. I believed them. Because that is what you do when you love someone. You believe them. But then came the day I was not invited to my own grandson's birthday party. I found out from a neighbor who saw balloons and clowns in the backyard. I sat in my living room that day, holding the wrapped gift I had spent hours picking out. I remember staring at the ribbon and thinking, maybe they just forgot. Maybe there was a mistake. But there wasn't. It was deliberate. A line had been drawn and I had been pushed to the other side. My son came by a week later. He looked tired, hollow. I asked him why. Why was I being shut out? He shrugged, said it was not him, said Charlie thought it was best for the kids, best for them not to be confused. Confused by what? By love? By warmth? By someone who had held them in her arms when they were barely more than dreams? I felt something snap inside me that day. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of sorrow that settles deep in your bones, a kind that reshapes your reflection. You begin to question everything. Was I too much? Too soft? Too present? The house that once echoed with laughter became unbearably quiet. I still made their favorite cookies out of habit, still kept their toothbrushes in the bathroom. But every day that passed without them chipped away at the foundation of who I thought I was. People think heartbreak is loud, but no, it is quiet. It is making breakfast for no one. It is folding tiny socks that will never be worn. It is walking past a toy aisle and feeling like a ghost. I started to shrink, not physically but in spirit, like I was folding into myself, days blurred. The only sound was the old clock ticking in the hallway and the occasional bird at the window. I stopped calling, stopped hoping, not because I gave up, but because hoping started to hurt more than silence. Still, I never stopped loving them. I would whisper their names like prayers. I would sit on the porch in the late afternoon the way I used to when I waited for the school bus to drop them off. Sometimes I thought I saw them from afar, a flash of a backpack, a laugh carried by the wind, but it was always someone else. Then came that night, that rainy night when everything I had lost came back to me in the form of a soaking, shivering little boy with eyes that had seen too much. The boy who once held my hand crossing the street, who used to beg for one more story before bed, who used to fall asleep on my chest, listening to my heartbeat like it was a lullaby. And suddenly the house was not quiet anymore. It was filled with the sound of trembling breath, the weight of secrets too heavy for a child to carry, the warmth of a bond that had not been broken, only buried. That night, I remembered who I was. I was Maria Elenice dos Santos, grandmother, protector, the thread that never stopped holding on. And as I looked at him, sleeping on my couch, wrapped in an old quilt that once belonged to his grandfather, I knew with certainty I would not lose him again. What would you say to a child who finally found safety after so much silence? Share your message in the comments. Let's fill this space with kindness and hope. And don't forget to subscribe. Every new story is a reminder that healing is possible. It didn't happen all at once. That is the part that haunts me the most. If it had been loud, if it had come with shouting or slammed doors or ultimatums, maybe I would have seen it sooner. But it came slowly, like rust creeping along a fence, like ivy curling its way into the cracks of a house you thought was solid. The unraveling started in whispers, in excuses that sounded harmless at first. The kind of little changes you convince yourself are temporary. The first time my son canceled a visit, he said they were tired. The kids had school projects, Charlie had a migraine, the car needed repairs. He promised they would come next weekend. That next weekend turned into another, then another, and still, I waited. I made cookies they never came to eat. I sat in the rocking chair with the porch light on, just in case they pulled into the driveway after sunset. I told myself they loved me, that this was just a busy season. Life happens. People get overwhelmed. But then came the birthdays. One year, my middle grandson turned 6. I baked a cake shaped like a dinosaur. He had been obsessed with dinosaurs ever since we visited the museum together the year before. I wrapped a book about prehistoric creatures and wrote a little note inside. You are strong like a T-Rex and smart like a raptor. Grandma loves you more than words can say. I waited all day with the cake on the table. The candles sat untouched. The book remained unopened. No one came, no call, no apology, nothing. That was the first time I cried in front of the empty chairs. When I called my son to ask what had happened, his voice was distant. He said the kids had already celebrated at home, that Charlie thought it would be too much to have 2 parties. He told me not to make a big deal out of it, that they would make it up to me. But the thing about being erased is that it rarely comes with a warning. One day you are the woman who taught them to tie their shoes. The next, you are a stranger they do not mention at dinner. Charlie's name started appearing more often in the excuses. She thought this. She said that. She feels it is better if. And with every new reason, I felt the walls closing in. She had opinions on everything. On how I talked to the children. On the books I read them. On the way I gave them too many hugs, or too many sweets, or too many reasons to feel safe. She would smile when she said it. That tight kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. The kind of smile a wolf wears when it is pretending to be tame. One Sunday, I showed up with a basket of muffins. I had not been invited, but I missed them. I thought if they saw me, if I reminded them that I was still here, maybe things would change. Charlie opened the door just enough for her face to appear. Her eyes scanned the basket, then my face. She didn't even try to hide the annoyance. "We are actually heading out," she said, her voice clipped. "Maybe next time." I asked if I could just say hello to the kids, just for a minute. "They are busy right now," she replied, already closing the door. And just like that, I was left on the porch with a basket of muffins and a heart full of ache. That was when I started to feel it, that sickening twist in your stomach when you know you are not welcome, when you sense that someone is rewriting the story and erasing your chapter. I tried to talk to my son. I begged him to see what was happening, but every conversation felt like I was speaking through a wall. He looked tired, hollowed out, like a man who had traded his spine for peace. He kept saying things like, "I don't want to be in the middle," or "You are reading too much into this," or "Charlie is just trying to protect the kids." Protect them from what? From love? From a grandmother who once stayed up all night sewing costumes for the school play because the store ran out of the right size? From a woman who sat in hospital rooms, who wiped tears and bandaged knees and remembered every little detail that made each of them feel seen? It made no sense. But control never does when you are on the outside of it. It operates in shadows. It isolates, then rewrites reality. And the person being controlled rarely sees it until it is too late. Or maybe they do. Maybe they just pretend not to, because the truth feels too heavy to hold. My house, once filled with laughter and muddy shoes and crayon drawings, became a museum of memories. I left their handprints on the wall near the back door. I kept their drawings in a folder. I even kept their old toothbrushes in the bathroom, as if on some miracle day they would show up unannounced and need them. I would walk through the aisles of the grocery store and still buy their favorite snacks. Cheese crackers for one, strawberry yogurt for the other. They stayed in my fridge until expiration dates turned to dust. I wrote letters I never sent, pages and pages, pouring out my heart, hoping that someday they might read them and know the truth, that I never stopped loving them, that I never walked away, that I was taken from them piece by piece, like petals plucked from a flower until nothing was left but the stem. Charlie was always strategic. She didn't just block visits. She poisoned the well, told the kids I was sick, that I was old and confused, that I might hurt them accidentally. She took everything I did and twisted it, turned bedtime stories into manipulation, turned warm meals into bribery. She built a narrative where I was the danger. And the worst part was that no one questioned it, because she said it with confidence, because she played the role of perfect mother with such precision that even doubt looked like disrespect. The community around them changed too. Friends who once waved at me in church now looked away. Teachers stopped calling. Neighbors who used to stop by with pies and casseroles no longer rang my doorbell. I became invisible. Not because I had done something wrong, but because Charlie decided I was inconvenient. And when a person like her decides to erase you, she does not need facts. She only needs control. And she had it. All of it. She had my son. She had my grandchildren. She had the narrative, and I was left alone with memories and silence and a pain that no one could see but that never left my body. It sat with me at breakfast, followed me to the mailbox, tucked itself into my bed at night, until the knock, until the rain. Until the boy who once called me his hero stood on my porch with eyes full of fear and whispered words that shattered whatever was left of the lie. "Grandma, don't tell. If she finds out, she will hit me again." That moment, that small whisper in the dark, was the first light I had seen in months. And it told me more than any lawyer or police report ever could. It told me that the story wasn't over, that no matter how carefully Charlie had tried to erase me, love had survived. Buried deep inside a boy's heart, love remembered its way home. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love? Or maybe you were that someone. Tell us your story in the comments, even if it's just one sentence. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, hit subscribe and stay with us. There was a time when my home felt like the center of the world, not because it was big or fancy, but because it was filled with the kind of warmth you cannot buy. The kind of love that grows between generations. A quiet strength that comes from routine moments that most people overlook. Back then, my house smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. The sounds of cartoons playing too loud, of little feet running through the hallway, of giggles echoing from every room, were part of my daily symphony. My grandkids were still small then. their legs always swinging off chairs that were too tall, their words full of wonder and unfiltered truth. They used to rush through the door like a windstorm the moment my son dropped them off. They did not even wait to take their shoes off, scattering them across the floor like breadcrumbs of joy. And I would be waiting in the kitchen with something warm on the stove and a story ready to be told. We had our rituals, our secret games. They would help me mix cake batter, standing on little stools with flour on their noses and fingers in the bowl. I let them lick the spoons, even though I told them not to. We all knew I never meant it. I used to make these little treasure hunts around the house. I would hide tiny notes under pillows or behind picture frames. Messages like, "You are my sunshine," or "Grandma loves you more than chocolate." They would run from room to room squealing when they found one. Their joy was loud and contagious, and it filled every crack in the walls. At night, I would tuck them into the guest room, the one I had painted soft yellow just for them. There were glow in the dark stars on the ceiling, and shelves lined with their favorite books. We would read until they could barely keep their eyes open. Sometimes they would ask me to sing. I am not a good singer, but they never cared. I would hum lullabies passed down from my mother. Old Portuguese songs I barely remembered the words to, but the melody always made them sleepy. It made me feel like I was giving them something sacred, something no one could take away. One morning, I woke up to find my youngest grandson in the kitchen wearing my apron. He was only 5. He had flour on his cheeks and was trying to crack eggs into a bowl. When I asked what he was doing, he looked up at me with a proud little grin and said, "I want to be like you, Grandma. I want to make people feel good with food." Those were the kind of moments that made my heart expand. Not just as a grandmother, but as a woman. I felt seen, needed, like I was helping shape something beautiful in this world, like I had purpose beyond surviving, beyond aging. There was a particular Saturday I will never forget. We made a fort in the living room using every sheet and pillow in the house. The kids called it our secret kingdom. We brought flashlights inside and told stories until the sun went down. My oldest grandson whispered, "Grandma, I wish I could live here forever." And in that moment, I wished he could too. I wished I could freeze time and keep them safe in that fort made of bedsheets and dreams. Even the hard days felt light when they were with me. Tantrums over broken toys, tears from scraped knees, spilled juice on the rug. It was all part of the dance, and I danced it gladly, because underneath the chaos was love, real, unshakable love. They trusted me, not because I was perfect, but because I was constant. I was the one who remembered which cup belonged to who knew their imaginary friends by name, who kept Band-Aids in every drawer just in case. I was their backup when the world felt too big, their soft landing when they fell. When they started to disappear from my life, it was not just the silence that hurt. It was the ghosts, the echoes of laughter that no longer filled the hallways, the way the house held their absence like a wound. I would pass by the guest room and find myself pausing at the door, still half expecting to see their tiny bodies tangled in blankets, their sleepy faces lit by morning sun. But there was only stillness, only dust and fading stars on the ceiling. I kept their drawings taped to the fridge long after the tape yellowed. There was one picture my middle grandson drew of the two of us sitting on the porch. He had written "my best friend" in crooked letters above our heads. Every time I looked at it, I felt both warmth and ache, because that was what we were, best friends. And no one had warned me how easy it is to lose that when someone decides you are no longer necessary. But love does not vanish. It lingers. In the way I still buy their favorite juice even though I know it will go to waste. In the way I fold tiny socks that no longer have feet to fill them. In the way I sit on the porch during the hour the school bus used to arrive. There were moments when I could almost hear them again, their laughter rising from the backyard like a forgotten melody, the soft patter of feet on the stairs, the knock on the bathroom door when they could not find their toothbrushes. Sometimes I would close my eyes and pretend that they were just away for the weekend, that any minute now the door would swing open and they would come running back to me with stories to tell and arms ready for hugging. I never stopped setting the table for 4. Even when the chairs stayed empty, even when the silence became too loud to bear, because a part of me believed they would remember. that buried somewhere beneath the lies and the distance and the manipulation, they would remember the scent of cinnamon, the feeling of warm blankets, the sound of lullabies hummed just for them, and the kind of love that never lets go. Control doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like a sweet smile and a polite tone, like someone who always says the right thing in public, someone who bakes cookies for school events and calls everyone honey. That was Charlie. On the surface, she seemed like the perfect partner for my son. Organized, responsible, the kind of woman who always had a clipboard or a plan. But underneath, there was something else, something calculating, something cold. At first, I mistook it for stress. New motherhood is hard. Blending families is harder. I gave her space. I made excuses for her when she snapped or rolled her eyes. I told myself she just needed time to adjust. I told myself she was trying her best. But I was wrong. She wasn't trying. She was controlling. And she was winning. She started with subtle boundaries. She didn't want the kids eating too much sugar. Fair enough. Then it was no sleepovers on school nights. Reasonable. But then it was no unsupervised visits. No hugging too long. No bedtime stories unless pre-approved. One by one, the things that made our relationship special were stripped away, until what was left didn't even resemble a family anymore. It felt more like supervised visitation in my own living room. I remember the first time she accused me of overstepping. It was after I bought the kids matching pajamas for Christmas. Just pajamas. Something soft and silly with little penguins on them. They had loved them. Wore them for 3 nights straight. I thought it was a sweet gesture, but the next day my son called me. Charlie thinks you're trying to make them prefer your house. He sounded embarrassed but also tired, like he had already had this argument and lost. Prefer my house? I was stunned. All I ever wanted was for them to feel safe, to feel loved. I didn't know love could be weaponized, that pajamas could be turned into proof of manipulation. From that moment on, everything I did was monitored, scrutinized, twisted. If I gave them a small gift, I was spoiling them. If I asked too many questions about school, I was prying. If I comforted them when they cried, I was undermining her authority. One day, my grandson came over with a small scrape on his elbow. Nothing serious, just a playground fall. I cleaned it gently with warm water and kissed it like I used to when he was little. He smiled at me and said, "Grandma, that made it better." I smiled back, unaware that those 5 words would turn into another battle. Later that week, I got a message from my son. "Charlie says you're interfering with how we teach the boys to handle pain, that you're making them soft, that your behavior is confusing to them." Confusing? Since when did comfort become confusing? I had spent years being their safe place, and now my very presence was being treated like a threat. It didn't stop there. She started blocking my phone number, at first for a day or 2, then weeks, then months. I would call and get no answer. Leave voicemails that went unheard, the kind of voicemails where you start out calm but end with your voice shaking. "Please just let me talk to them, just 5 minutes. I miss them." No response. Eventually, the number was disconnected. She also started controlling what the kids were told about me. I found this out the hard way during one of the last visits I was allowed. My youngest grandson looked up at me and said, "Mommy says you're not safe to be around, that you forget things, that you're sick in the head." I felt the words like a slap. I looked at him, so innocent, so trusting, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him none of it was true, that his mother was lying, that I was still the same grandma who rocked him to sleep and sang to him when he had the flu. But I couldn't, because the damage was already done. The seed had been planted, and no matter how much love I poured into him, it was being poisoned at the root. My son watched it happen. And he did nothing. He told me it was easier this way, that fighting made things worse, that Charlie was just being protective, that maybe I needed to take a step back and let them figure it out. But I was watching my grandkids slip away from me, not because I failed them, but because someone else decided that I didn't fit the version of life she was building. And my son, my own flesh and blood, was too afraid to challenge her. Or worse, he believed her. The final blow came one afternoon when I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer, a formal notification. Charlie and my son were requesting that I have no further contact with the children. No calls, no letters, no visits. I sat at the kitchen table holding that piece of paper like it was a death certificate. In a way, it was. The end of something sacred. A relationship built with bedtime stories and scraped knees and whispered secrets, erased with ink on a page. I stared at the envelope for hours, the return address printed in neat, bold letters. The smell of paper mixed with something sour in my throat. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, stunned, hollow. Then slowly, the grief came. Not like a wave, but like a flood that builds beneath your floorboards. Quiet at first, then devastating. That night, I went into the guest room and opened the closet where I kept their things. Tiny shoes, drawings, a toy train that no longer worked. I sat on the floor and held a little sock in my hand for what felt like forever. That was when the tears came. The kind of tears that don't make sound, that just fall, heavy and endless. People often talk about heartbreak as if it's sudden, but mine came piece by piece, letter by letter, silence by silence, until there was nothing left to hold on to but memories, and even those started to feel like they didn't belong to me anymore. The silence in my house became something I could hear. It had a weight, a shape. It filled every room, settled in the corners, hovered above my bed at night. I would walk through my home like a ghost, opening drawers and cabinets I had no need for, just to make noise, just to feel like I was still here, that I still existed. After that letter arrived, everything changed. Before, there was still a sliver of hope, a belief that maybe one day they would come around, maybe Charlie would soften, maybe my son would remember who I was. But that letter, with its legal language and emotionless tone, took that hope and crushed it into dust. It made it official. It turned the wound into something permanent. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed and replay conversations in my head. The last time I held my grandson's hand. The last story I read to them. The last time they said, "I love you, Grandma." I clung to those memories like lifelines, afraid that if I didn't repeat them enough, I would forget the sound of their voices. I kept a notebook on my nightstand. In the dark, I would scribble down little things I remembered. The way my granddaughter used to twist her hair when she was nervous. How my youngest would press his cheek against mine and whisper secrets only meant for me. My days blurred. Morning became afternoon, and suddenly it was dark again. I lost track of time. Meals became optional. Showers felt pointless. I stopped going out. The world outside felt too loud, too cruel. I no longer wanted to run into neighbors who would ask about the kids. I didn't want to lie, or worse, tell the truth and see the pity in their eyes. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing in her kitchen staring at the same cup of tea for hours. Sometimes it looks like unopened mail piling up on the counter, or a phone that never rings. It's brushing your teeth with tears in your eyes. It's hearing a child's laugh in the distance and having to sit down because your knees suddenly feel too weak to carry you. One day, I received a picture message from an unknown number. It was blurry, just a photo of a paper drawing taped to a refrigerator. At first, I didn't understand, but when I zoomed in, I saw my name written at the bottom in shaky handwriting. Grandma. My heart stopped. It was my oldest grandson's handwriting. I replied to the number. "Who is this? How did you get this photo?" No response. I stared at the screen for hours. I waited. I prayed. But nothing came. Still, that photo was enough to breathe something back into me. A flicker of something I thought I had lost. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. A reminder that somewhere out there, they were still thinking of me. Still remembering. I started writing again. Letters I would never send. Pages and pages filled with everything I wanted them to know. That I missed them. That I was still here. That I forgave them for not being strong enough. That I never blamed them for being pulled away. That I still cooked their favorite meals on Sundays and left their chairs at the table untouched. In one letter, I wrote, "I know you're growing up without me, but please don't forget how much I love you. Not just in words, but in every moment we shared, in every story, in every hug, in every time I kissed your forehead and told you everything would be okay. That kind of love doesn't disappear. It lives in you. It always will. I kept the letters in a box under my bed, labeled for later, for someday, for when they find their way back to me. I also started seeing someone, not romantically, a counselor. My neighbor Linda had noticed I hadn't left the house in weeks. She knocked one morning, holding a basket of banana bread and a business card. She didn't say much, just looked me in the eye and said, "I know it's hard. You don't have to do it alone." The woman I saw was kind, gentle in the way only someone who has known loss can be. She never pushed, just listened, asked questions like, "What part of you feels the most broken right now? And what do you miss the most?" The answer was always the same. Them. I missed their voices, their laughter, their chaos, the way they would argue about who got the bigger cookie and then end up sharing it anyway. But more than anything, I missed who I was when I was with them. I missed being their safe place, their comfort, their warmth. I missed being the person they ran to, not the person they were told to run from. My counselor helped me understand that what happened wasn't about failure, that what Charlie did was abuse, not just to me, but to them. That isolation is a tactic used by people who need control. That love was never the problem. It was the threat, because love makes people strong. And strong people question things. That conversation stayed with me. It made something shift inside me. I stopped blaming myself. I started cooking again. Not because anyone was coming over, but because I deserved to eat. I opened the windows, let the sunlight in. I played the old lullabies I used to hum. At first it hurt, but then it started to feel like remembering, like reconnecting with the woman I used to be. I even took the picture that had arrived on my phone and printed it. I framed it and put it on the mantle. It wasn't much, just a crayon drawing and my name. But to me, it was a lifeline, a whisper from the past that said, "You still matter." One rainy afternoon, as I folded laundry in the quiet of my kitchen, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. 3 knocks at the door, soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart pounded, my hands trembled. I walked to the door as if in a dream, and when I opened it, everything inside me shattered. He stood there, my grandson, soaked, shaking, eyes wide and terrified. He didn't say anything at first, just looked up at me like he wasn't sure if I was real. And then, in the smallest voice, he whispered, "Please don't tell anyone I'm here." And I knew. This wasn't just a visit. This was an escape. His clothes clung to his small body, soaked from the rain. His shoes squished with every step as he hesitantly walked past the threshold. Water dripped from his sleeves, creating little puddles on the floor, but I didn't care. All I could see was his face, pale, afraid, and older than it should have been. There were dark circles under his eyes, his lips slightly trembling, and in that moment, he wasn't just my grandson. He was a child in danger, a child who had made the unthinkable choice to run away, to brave the storm, to find safety in the only place he remembered as safe. I didn't ask him questions right away. I simply reached for a towel and wrapped it around him. He stood still, not even shivering anymore, like his body had forgotten how to react. I guided him to the couch, just like I used to when he came over with scraped knees or nightmares. I made him a cup of warm milk, and as he held the mug between his small hands, I saw how badly they were shaking. It wasn't the cold, it was fear. He didn't look me in the eyes at first. He stared down at the blanket I tucked around him, avoiding my gaze like he was ashamed. But I wasn't going to push. Children speak when they feel safe, when they're ready. I knew that. After a few minutes, he whispered, almost too quietly to hear. She said if I ever came here again, she'd lock me in the garage all night. She said she'd break all my stuff and blame it on me. I felt something ancient and fierce awaken inside me. Not anger, something deeper, something primal. The kind of protective love only a grandmother can understand. I wanted to take away every bit of fear he had ever felt. I wanted to hold him until the world made sense again. I asked him softly, "Has she ever hurt you?" He hesitated, then nodded. I asked him if he felt safe at home. He shook his head. That was all I needed to know. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't. My body was on autopilot. I made him another cup of milk. I asked what he wanted to eat. He asked for grilled cheese. I made 2. He ate in silence, chewing slowly, as if each bite reminded him of something he had missed for a long time. After dinner, I gave him a bath. He didn't resist. He just moved through the motions, like a child who had been made small too many times. As I washed his hair, I noticed a bruise near his shoulder blade. It was dark, almost purple, old enough to have turned but recent enough to hurt. When I touched it gently, he flinched. I didn't ask who did it. I didn't need to. I gave him clean clothes, pajamas that still smelled faintly of lavender from years ago. He smiled, just a little when he saw them. "You still kept these?" "Of course I did," I said. "I kept everything." He looked up at me, and I saw the boy I used to know. The boy who once believed I could fix anything with a kiss and a cookie. And in that moment, something shifted. He leaned into me, resting his head on my chest, and whispered, "I missed you so much, Grandma." I held him. I rocked him gently, like I did when he was small, and as he drifted off to sleep in my arms, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him go back. I laid him down on the couch and covered him with the same quilt his grandfather used to wrap around us during thunderstorms. I watched him breathe, slow and even, for the first time in what must have been months. Then I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I called my neighbor Linda. She answered on the first ring. "He's here," I said. He showed up at my door. He's scared, and I'm scared too. Linda was calm, strong. She told me what to do, what numbers to call, who to talk to. She had once worked as a school counselor and she knew the system. She told me to document everything, the bruise, the conversation, the threats. She reminded me not to call Charlie or my son just yet, not until I had spoken to someone official. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the couch, listening to my grandson's breathing, watching over him like a sentry. Every creak in the house made my heart race. Every gust of wind outside sounded like footsteps. But nothing happened. The night passed, quiet, safe. The next morning, I called Child Protective Services. I told them everything. They sent someone within hours. The caseworker's name was Monica. She was young but firm, professional but kind. She spoke to my grandson with care, asking gentle questions. He told her everything, not all at once, but enough, about the yelling, about the threats, about the nights spent alone in the garage because he didn't finish his food fast enough, about how Charlie would throw things, break toys, scream for hours, about how he was told that no one loved him except her. Monica listened, took notes, photographed the bruise, promised to follow protocol. When she left, she looked me in the eye and said, "You did the right thing. Keep him here for now. I'll escalate this immediately." I nodded, but my heart was still racing. Later that day, I finally heard from my son. His voice was frantic. "Is he with you?" I said yes. "He's fine. He's safe, but we need to talk." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how bad it was, but he did know. On some level, he had seen things, heard things, chosen silence over conflict. I didn't judge him. I just told him the truth. He's staying with me until this is resolved." My son didn't argue. He just said, "Take care of him, please." And I did. That night, my grandson and I ate dinner together. We watched a movie. We laughed for the first time in months. He fell asleep in my bed, curled up next to me like he used to when he had nightmares. And I whispered to him, "You're home now." Because he was, not just in a house, but in a heart that had never stopped beating for him. I cradled his hand in mine as we sat in the living room, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. Rain pounded on the windows, dancing like a chorus of sorrow outside. He sat beside me, wrapped in the quilt his grandfather once used, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. The silence no longer felt empty. With him there, in flesh and bone, it felt like a promise. I asked him to tell me where he had come in through. He said he slipped through the back gate, the same one we used when they were younger, the one I never locked because I believed in trust. He remembered that path well. It wound along the garden wall, past the rose bushes we planted together, past the old oak tree under which we used to picnic. He had walked barefoot in parts, the soles of his feet raw, his mind fixated on one thing: come home. He said she'd been following him, watching him. She once stood in the hallway at night and told him she would find him if he ever tried this. He told me how he hesitated at the corner, how every crack in the pavement looked like danger, how every shadow seemed pregnant with her voice. But something in him refused the fear, something he carried inside that said, "I can't breathe without her." I let the tears come then, not big sobs, quiet tears that traced the planes of my face. I rested my head on his. I whispered, "I'm here, I'm here." He let me stay like that, and I felt his small frame tensing, as though preparing for betrayal. But it never came. I asked him what she said when he asked to talk about me. She said I was unstable, that I was angry, that I had made threats. She told him I had to let her protect him, that if he loved me, he would respect her rules and stay away. And every lie she spoke, he swallowed because she said them softly, like truths. He told me about nights locked in his room, doors bolted from the outside, little windows cracked open so he could breathe. He whispered of toys hidden, books torn, lights shut early. In his voice, I heard a child suffocated by fear. In his memory, I saw a world where safety was a threat. I asked him who he was afraid of losing. He looked at me as though he wondered if I would leave him too. He said he was afraid of being alone, of her retaliation, of what she would do if she discovered he had come here. He said, "I understand why you stayed away. I just couldn't anymore." I swallowed the bitterness of every missed moment. The birthdays, the Christmas mornings, the stories, the laughter. I swallowed them because he was here now, and he needed me more than ever. I resolved in that moment that I would fight. For him, with him, beside him. I held him as the rain softened. I listened to his breathing slow, felt his head rest on my chest, watched his eyes flutter closed. The quilt of memories, of love, of promises once broken now mended over the years we had lost, wrapped us in its warmth. Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, two hearts that had wandered returned home. In every breath, every pulse, the air seemed to settle. The shadows receded. The walls held us. And in that quiet, I realized something deeper. His escape was not a momentary rescue. It was the turning point of a story that would not end in silence. The next morning, the world looked different. Not brighter, not softer, but different. Like something had shifted in the walls of the house, in the air, in me. I woke up early and made breakfast, the kind he used to love. Toast with cinnamon sugar, scrambled eggs, a bowl of strawberries with a drizzle of honey. When I set it all on the table, he stared at it like it was a dream he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. His fingers hovered over the plate before he asked quietly, "Can I really eat all this?" I smiled and said, "Every last bite." He didn't waste a second. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was full, peaceful, the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other without words. I watched him chew carefully, his eyes scanning the kitchen like he was remembering things. The old calendar still hanging crooked, the chip in the corner of the countertop, the fridge magnets shaped like farm animals. He pointed to the cow and said, "You used to make her moo when we were sad." I laughed because I had forgotten that, and yet it came back so clear. I pressed the little toy and let it moo again. He grinned, a real grin, and for a moment, he wasn't afraid. After breakfast, I let him pick what we would do. He asked if we could go outside, just the backyard. He didn't want anyone to see us. We stepped out quietly. The grass was wet and the sky still gray, but he ran barefoot across the lawn like he had done years ago. He climbed the old tire swing that creaked under his weight and swung back and forth, not speaking, just breathing, watching, feeling. He asked if the garden was still his. I told him it never stopped being his. We knelt by the patch of earth we used to plant sunflowers in. It was overgrown now, weeds tangled like vines of time. He started pulling them out one by one, and I joined him. It was like he was trying to reclaim something, a piece of himself lost in all those quiet years, and I let him. We worked side by side, digging through soil and memory. Later, I gave him a notebook. It was plain, black cover, empty pages. I said, "You can write anything in here, things you remember, things you feel, things you're afraid to say out loud." He opened it and held the pen for a long time. Then he wrote 3 words: "I feel safe." I looked away so he wouldn't see the tears. In the afternoon, Monica, the caseworker, returned. She brought another woman with her, someone from a children's advocacy center. They spoke to my grandson in a separate room while I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. They were kind, thorough, professional. They asked questions with care, writing everything down. When they came back into the room, their faces were serious. Monica placed her hand gently on mine and said, "There's enough. We're opening a formal investigation." The next hours were a blur. More calls, more questions, a visit from a police officer who took an official statement. They reassured me again and again, "You're doing the right thing. You're not alone." But I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was walking across a tightrope strung between love and fear. Every step forward felt like it could collapse everything, but I kept moving, because he needed me to. That night, after dinner, he asked if he could sleep in the guest room, the yellow one with the glow in the dark stars. I had never taken them down, not because I thought he'd return, but because I couldn't bear to erase what we had built. When I tucked him in, he looked up at the ceiling, eyes wide. "They're still glowing. They always did, even when you were gone." He pulled the covers up to his chin and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting me." I sat by the door after he fell asleep, just listening to his breathing again, deep and steady. And I remembered the first time I ever rocked him to sleep. He was only a few months old, tiny, fragile. But even then, he held my finger with that same quiet strength. The next day brought more change. A social worker visited his school. Interviews were conducted, reports filed. The process had begun, a process I didn't fully understand, but was determined to see through. Because now that he had come to me, now that I knew the truth, there was no going back. I had also started to hear from my son again. Tentative messages. First, just questions. Is he okay? Has he eaten? Then guilt. I didn't know how bad it was. I should have listened. And then a request. Can I see him? I didn't know how to respond, because part of me still felt betrayed. But I also saw the boy in him too. The boy I raised. The boy who used to fall asleep on my lap during Sunday sermons. He wasn't evil. He was weak. And maybe that was worse. So I asked my grandson, "Do you want to see your dad?" He hesitated, then nodded. "But only if you're there." So we arranged it. A supervised visit. At my house. Nothing more than an hour. When my son arrived, I saw a shadow of who he used to be. Hollow-eyed. Tired. He knelt down in front of his son and said, "I'm sorry. I should have protected you." The boy didn't speak, just looked at him, like he was trying to decide if it was safe to believe again. I watched them. I didn't interfere. I just stayed close. My grandson reached out and touched his father's hand. Not a hug, not forgiveness, just contact, a beginning. When the hour ended, my son stood to leave. He turned to me. "Thank you for saving him." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't do it for him. I did it for a boy who deserved to be a child again, and for a grandmother who refused to be forgotten. The following weeks moved slowly, each day unfolding like a cautious step forward. My house, once quiet and heavy with grief, now pulsed with a gentle rhythm again. The sound of footsteps returning to the hallway, the shuffle of pages in a book, laughter, soft, not yet confident, but real, coming from the yellow room. The boy who had arrived with fear in his bones was slowly finding pieces of himself again. I began to notice little things. He slept with his hand curled around the edge of the blanket, like he was anchoring himself to something safe. He hummed when he brushed his teeth. He asked if he could help set the table and always placed the forks in the same perfect alignment. He spoke more freely, though there were still pauses in his voice when certain topics came up, like when he asked if she had called, or when he checked the windows more than once before going to bed. One morning, while folding laundry together, he said something that broke my heart in a new way. I didn't know grown-ups could lie that much. I asked him what he meant, though I already knew. "She used to say you hated us, that you stopped calling because you didn't care, that if we cried for you, we were being selfish." His voice didn't shake. He didn't cry. He just said it like it was a fact he had lived with for too long. I knelt down and took his hands in mine. I looked him straight in the eye. That was never true. Not a single word of it. I called every day. I left messages, I sent letters, I prayed for you every night. He didn't reply, just nodded. Later that day, we found the old photo albums in the hall closet, thick with dust, but intact. We sat together on the couch, flipping through pages of memories. Birthdays, summer picnics, Halloween costumes. I watched his face as he looked at each photo, as if trying to reconnect the boy in the picture with the one sitting in my living room. You used to dress up as a pirate, I reminded him. You made me walk the plank off the porch 3 times in a row. He laughed, really laughed, and it felt like a room reopening after years of being locked. These moments, small as they seemed, were the bricks we used to rebuild, day by day, memory by memory. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Monica kept in touch. She visited often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes with updates I barely understood. Legal terms, custody reviews, court-appointed evaluations. Each visit came with a mix of hope and anxiety. I wanted him to stay, but I also knew this wasn't over. That paperwork and systems still held power over what happened next. One night I asked him if he ever wanted to go back to their house. He didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, watching the wind bend the trees. "Only if it's just to get my stuff," he said. "And only if you come with me." I promised I would. A week later, Monica called with news. A hearing had been scheduled, not a trial yet, but a formal review. A judge would hear everything. The reports, the interviews, my statement, his, and then decide what steps to take. When I told him, he looked nervous. "Do I have to go?" I said no, not yet, but I explained what it meant. That this was the beginning of deciding who would protect him, that his voice, even if it was shared through Monica, mattered. He asked if they would believe him. I said I didn't know, but I would, always. The night before the hearing, he couldn't sleep. I found him sitting in the kitchen with the notebook I gave him open in front of him. Pages filled with words, some scratched out, some underlined, all pouring from a place he had kept hidden too long. He handed me the notebook. "Read this when I'm asleep." I waited until he went back to bed. Then I read. He had written about nights in the garage, about her screaming in his face, about being called names, about how she made him throw away a card he had made for me one Christmas and told him if he cried, she'd make him sleep outside. He wrote about the nightmares, the guilt, the fear of not being believed. But he also wrote about the way my house smelled like cinnamon, about how I always made toast just right, about the way I hugged without needing a reason. He ended with one sentence, circled twice. "I want to stay where I am not afraid to be myself." I cried as I read it, not just from sadness, but from awe, at the strength it took to survive, at the courage it took to run, at the hope he still held on to. The hearing was quiet, formal. Monica went in. I stayed in the waiting room with him, distracting him with stories, jokes, anything to pass the time. When Monica came back, she knelt beside him and said softly, "They listened. They believed you." He didn't understand at first. "You don't have to go back." He stared at her, then at me. "I can stay? You can stay." He ran into my arms, sobbing, not like a scared child, but like someone who had been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. That night, we lit a candle by the window, a small ritual I used to do when he was away. I told him it was to guide him home. He watched the flame flicker and said, "It worked. I found my way back." The day after the hearing felt strangely quiet, not the kind of silence that crushes you, but the kind that gently wraps around you like a soft blanket. My grandson walked through the house with a lightness in his steps I hadn't seen in years. He sang to himself while brushing his teeth. He lingered longer at the table after meals. He didn't check the windows every hour. It was subtle, but undeniable. Something inside him had shifted. He was beginning to believe he was safe. I noticed him pulling books off the shelves again, old picture books we used to read together. He sat on the floor and flipped through them like he was searching for something familiar, something that reminded him of who he used to be. I sat beside him and read aloud. At first, I wasn't sure if he was really listening, but then I saw his lips moving along with the words. He remembered. We started gardening again. The little patch we had cleared was now full of new seeds he had chosen. sunflowers, just like before, but also marigolds and basil and cherry tomatoes. He insisted we name each one. He called one of the tomato plants Brave. I asked him why, and he said, because it's growing, even though it's small. Every day, he'd run outside to check on them. Sometimes he talked to the plants, encouraged them, told them they were doing great. It was like he was giving to them the words he had needed for so long. He started asking questions too, hard ones, like, why did she hurt me? Why didn't anyone stop her sooner? I didn't always have answers. Sometimes I just said I'm sorry. Sometimes I just held him, but I never lied. I told him the truth when I could, and when I couldn't, I sat with him in the uncertainty. He also asked about his father more often. He didn't speak with anger, just curiosity. Where does he live now? Does he miss me? Does he know I stayed? I encouraged those questions. I told him that wondering was human, that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be his choice, not something anyone could demand. We also created new routines. Every Saturday morning we made pancakes together. He liked adding chocolate chips and pretending to be a chef. He wore my old apron and gave himself a fake restaurant name. Grandma's Sunshine Diner, he called it. I was his sous chef, and he made me call him Chef J. One night he asked to sleep with the door open, just a crack, not all the way. That was huge. For months he needed it shut and locked, afraid someone would walk in. But now he wanted it open, just enough to feel the air. I asked him why. Because now I know I can yell, and you'll hear me. That night, I stayed up a little later than usual, listening to the breeze rustling through the trees outside, thinking about the long road we had walked together. It hadn't been easy. There were still nights he woke up sweating, still moments he flinched when someone raised their voice, still pieces of him that curled inward when things felt uncertain. But there was also laughter, curiosity, joy. Monica called to check in again. She said the judge's ruling would be finalized soon, that barring anything unexpected, he would remain in my custody permanently. I thanked her, but after I hung up, I just sat there, not celebrating, just breathing, because I realized that what I had fought for all these months wasn't just legal custody. It was the right to love him without interruption, to protect without apology, to rebuild without fear that someone would take him away again. We went to the library one afternoon. He got his very own library card. I watched his face as he signed his name, the pride in his eyes. It was such a simple moment, but monumental for a child who once wasn't allowed to speak freely. He picked out a stack of books, some about space, others about animals, and one about how to grow the perfect sunflower. That night, as he was brushing his teeth, he turned to me and said, "Grandma, I think I'm going to be okay." And I believed him. He wasn't healed yet. That takes time, maybe even a lifetime. But he was whole again. Whole in a way that mattered. We didn't talk much about the past anymore unless he brought it up. I let him guide those conversations. Sometimes he told stories from his old house like they belonged to someone else. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. I didn't push. Healing doesn't follow rules. I started noticing his drawings changing too. He used to draw storms, dark skies, lightning, shadows. Now he drew trees, ladders, windows with open curtains, people holding hands. One drawing showed our house, the backyard, the tire swing, and the two of us planting sunflowers. He had written home at the bottom. He asked if we could hang it on the fridge. I said I couldn't imagine a better place for it. There are moments in life that split time in two, before and after. That night he showed up at my door, soaked from the rain, eyes filled with fear. Was one of those moments. I didn't know then that everything would change, that pain would lead to healing. That silence would give way to a voice so strong it echoed through the walls of this old house. Now, months later, I walk through the same rooms, but they feel different, lighter, warmer. His laughter lingers in the air long after he's gone to school. His drawings still cover the refrigerator. His shoes, always kicked off in the middle of the hallway, remind me that this place is alive again. Every morning, I watch him walk to the school bus, backpack bouncing with every step, arms waving goodbye as if it were the greatest adventure of his day. And I wave back, every single time, because I never want him to question whether someone is waiting for him, whether he's loved, whether he matters. He matters so deeply. He is no longer the boy who came through my door with rain dripping from his hair and secrets in his throat. He is growing, thriving, learning what it means to be seen, to be safe, to be enough. Some days he still asks questions that make my heart ache. He asks why some adults choose hurt over love, why lies can sound so much like truth when you're small, why the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes don't. I never pretend to have all the answers, but I tell him this: you are not what they did to you. You are who you decide to become, and he is becoming something beautiful. He is becoming kind and curious. He is planting sunflowers and checking the weather to make sure they're okay. He is reading books about galaxies and asking questions about how stars are born. He is building forts and writing poems and laughing so hard he snorts milk out of his nose. He is living. And because he is living, I am too. There were days I thought I had failed him. Days I replayed every missed call, every unopened door, every moment I doubted my own instincts. But I've learned that guilt is heavy and love is louder. Love doesn't always arrive when we want it to. Sometimes it comes battered, late, drenched in rain. But when it arrives, it changes everything. To those of you listening, to anyone who has felt the sting of absence, the ache of injustice, the grief of silence, please know this: you are not alone. There is always a door waiting to open, a light waiting to be turned back on, a voice, maybe yours, ready to be heard. And if you know someone like him, a child silenced, forgotten, hidden behind closed doors, don't look away. Speak, act, listen. Even your smallest gesture could be the lifeline they need. This story is mine, but the truth in it belongs to many. To every grandmother fighting in silence, to every child waiting to be seen, to every person who believed love was enough to start again. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this with me. If this story touched something in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that's already waiting for you on the screen. Because every view, every comment, every share is a light in the dark for someone else who might still be searching for their way back home. And remember, no matter how long the silence has lasted, no matter how heavy the rain, there is always a door, there is always a light, there is always a way back to love.